All right, so everyone holding by the Book of Leviticus, chapter 18. Again, more welcome. Everyone holding by Book of Leviticus, chapter 18. We are actually in verse 3. Just finally finished verse 2 with all those classes. Again, want to welcome holding by Book of Leviticus, chapter 18, verse 3. So we said before, the God spoke to the Jewish people, saying, I am the Lord your God. Right? We spoke all about that. Verse 3, Kamais Eretz Mitzrayim, Asher Yeshavtim Bo, Lo Tasu Kamas Eretz Canaan, Asher Ani Mevi Etzchem Shama, Lo Tasu B'chukoseim, Lo Selechu. So here what the Torah tell me. Torah says after the deeds of the land of Egypt, where are you going to live? Right? Where are you going to live? Or where you lived, let's say. You shall not do, right? You shall not go according, kind of hard to translate here, but basically the actions of the people of Egypt, you shouldn't do, right? The one where you're going to dwell amongst the people of Egypt, don't go after them. Don't do what they do, right? The free translation over here. Lo tasu, right? Lo tasu, don't go according to their actions. Ukemais Eretz Canaan, and the lands, the deeds of the land of Canaan, of the people of Canaan, that I'm going to bring you to, right? That you are going to live there. Lo tasu, again, don't do their actions. Don't do what they do. And then it says, neither shall you walk in their ways. You should not go in their ways. Or literally, should not go in their ordinances. Now, normally, I mean, we're going to dissect this verse, but normally, when it says "b'chukoseichem lo selechu," right, it means don't go in their ways, right? Don't do what they do. But a chok means something we don't understand, right? Usually, there's a difference between a chok and what we call a mishpat, right? A chok is a law that we don't understand, right, in the Torah, and there are laws that we do understand, right? Mishpat, right? There are things that that we understand more. In either case, interesting. The Torah says, don't go in their ways. Right? Torah says, by the Egyptians, by the Canaanites, where God is going to put you there, going to put you in both places, right? Where they're Canaanites, where they're Egyptians. And in both cases, don't go after their actions. Right? Do not go after their actions. And you shouldn't go according to their ordinances, according to their laws. Right? So basically, God puts Jewish people and they're going to live in two different places, right? Along the way, this is where they're going to live. And God's telling you, don't go there. Don't go according to their actions, because basically their actions are going to be corrupt, they're going to be immoral, right? Which we're going to see. So obviously, there's a question, which again, we are going to see, right? And that is, so if God doesn't want you to go according to what they do, so why did he put you there? What's the purpose, of putting you there? And we can ask, the Jews were in Egypt, they came out after 210 years, they're supposed to be there for 400 years, right? And God took them out early because they would have reached the last level of impurity, right? They would have reached that last level of impurity. They would have been totally destroyed, spiritually. But not only that, Rashi says, in the Book of Exodus, only 20% came out. So, kind of hard to understand, where 80% died by the end of the plague of darkness. So you're left with 20% of the Jewish people. Seemingly, 8 million people do not come out of Egypt. So, obvious question also, so why put them there? Right? What was the purpose of putting them there if they're going to get pretty much demolished spiritually? Right? So whatever that we've dealt with before, but let's see what Rashi over here says. So Rashi says, after the deeds of the land of Egypt, you shall not do, shouldn't go in their way. What does that tell me? What does that tell me? Rashi says that the deeds of the Egyptians and the Canaanites, Rashi says, were more corrupt than those of all other nations. They were worse. These people were worse than any other nation. And that the district of Egypt in which the Israelites lived, i.e., where did they live? They lived in Goshen, right? They lived in Goshen. So he says, even the place where they lived, it was even more corrupt than all the rest of Egypt. Now it's interesting. The Torah says that they were given the land of Goshen, right, to go live there. That's where the the Kohanim and others lived, and the Egyptians didn't touch them. Nonetheless, it's a totally corrupt place. Right? It wasn't Yehuda goes down there in order to establish shivas, and all that. This is obviously after with everything going on in Egypt, they had their own place there. But again, it didn't, God did not send them in a place that was free of impurity. He didn't send them in a land of milk and honey, where everything's great and everyone's living a moral life, and they're living a very spiritual life, right? Nonetheless, Rashi here says, first of all, you gotta understand that the Egyptians, Canaanites, were more corrupt than any other nation. That's why God is calling them out. That's the first thing. And not only that, but even where they went to Goshen was even worse. That's the first thing. Second thing is Rashi says, and after the deeds of the land of Canaan, right? You don't go according to what the Canaanites did, right? Because I'm going to bring you there. I'm going to bring you to the land of Canaan. Don't do according to their actions. Again, what does that tell me? Says Rashi. Rashi says that the Canaanite clans there, who Jewish people subdued, were more corrupt than all the others. Right? Good to know. Right? They're there to wipe them out, but don't go according to their actions. So again, we can ask the question, maybe we'll deal with it after we finish Rashi here, but you have to ask the question, so why send them there? If these people are so corrupt, and they are like more corrupt than anyone else, and God is going to call them out, okay. God's going to call them out, very good. Right? Don't go according to their actions. Okay. So I send them there. Send them to a better place. Send them a place that's not as bad. Right? So we'll have to deal with that, I guess. And the last thing here Rashi says is, neither shall you walk in their ordinances. Do not go according to their ordinances, to their ways. Now, Rashi asks the question, what is Scripture left unsaid when it spoke of the deeds of the Egyptians and the Canaanites, that it felt compelled to add in other words, what does the Torah tell me? Right? The Torah tells me the actions, the ways of the people of Egypt don't go, right? Don't go in their ways. Right? Don't go in their ways. And then the Torah says, and the actions of the Canaanites don't go in their ways. I'm going to bring you there, but don't go in their ways. And then the Torah says, and don't go in their ways. Why? What's it doing there? I already understand from what the Torah says, not to go in the ways of the Egyptians, not to go in the ways, of the Canaanites, and don't walk in their ordinances. Do not walk in their ordinances superfluous. I don't need it. There's no purpose there. Right? You already told me. Don't go according to their actions. Right? The Egyptians and the Canaanites. You don't have to tell me. Do not go according to their ordinances. So we do understand, before we finish Rashi here, we do understand very clear that these people are worse. Right? That's why God is singling them out. Okay? And even where the Jews were in Egypt and Goshen, very good, they were even worse. Okay. So don't go in their ways, and then it tells me don't go, don't not walk in their ordinances. Same thing. Like, you don't need to tell me for emphasis. That's what Rashi is saying. So yes, why did the Torah feel compelled to add the words who don't go in their ways? Why did the Torah tell me that? So Rashi says, by these latter words, i.e., these words, in these latter words, what does it refer to? Do not go according to their social customs. Things which have assumed for them the character of a law. What's he talking about? Right? What's he talking about over here? He says, for example, their laws refer to, one second. Yeah, that, again, but the latter words refers to social customs, things which have assumed for them the character of a law. Now, what is that? What is that exactly? Rashi says, for instance, the frequenting of theaters and race courses. Yeah. Don't go to the theaters. Right? By them, it's already a law. Right? Don't go to their theaters. Don't go to their stadiums. It calls it race courses. Don't go to their stadiums. But according to Rabbi Meir, the Gemara says, and Shabbos 67a, Rabbi Meir says, no, what is talking about? What is talking about? Don't go in their ways. It means the ways of the Amorites. Very good. What are the ways of the Amorites? What are the ways of the Amorites? Ways of the Amorites are superstitious practices, which the rabbis talk about. Right? So now, when we talk about the deeds of the Amorites, it means, first of all, when we talk about, it says not go after their maseh, right? Maseh, their actions. That is conduct of an individual, right? That's looking at it in the singular. Don't go after what individuals do. And by chol koseyem, koselechu, denotes the general customs of the people, institutions, or what they do, in a national way. Don't go after their ways. Now, many times people are going to claim, obviously falsely, they're going to claim, beyond the shadow of a doubt, Torah is ancient. Torah is not speaking to us, right? Torah is a lot of times speaks about in agricultural terms. We don't live, most people don't live on farms today, right? Let's say. So maybe a lot of things, especially if they're in the land of Israel, don't necessarily apply outside the land of Israel. Okay. But the same doesn't apply, right? And people will make the excuse. I mean, not like they ever read it. Not like, they ever want to learn about it. Okay. But the same, come on, it's not relevant. It's not relevant to us, right? So it's like you would say, why would I bother keeping it? Or, why would I bother keeping some of it? Maybe some of it makes sense. Okay. So maybe, some of the things that make sense, we're going to keep. But the vast majority of things, they don't make sense, which is true. Logically, according to our own logic, they don't make sense. Okay. Doesn't mean we don't have to understand it. Doesn't mean we don't have to keep it. Very good. Yeah, so let's say it doesn't apply. Right? A lot of this doesn't apply. Now, Rashi's talking, right? When did Rashi live? Right in the year 1000? Right? He's talking about 1,000 years ago? Or 1,000 years ago? Yeah. So Rashi says over here, again, twice, don't go in their ways. Yeah, I don't need to say it, but he's telling you, don't go in the ways of them doing things in ways they do, let's say, in a national way. What's a national way? Yeah, what's a national way? What do a lot of people do? Not going to say everybody, but a lot of people do for sure. They go to theaters, right? They go to plays. They go to movies, and had movies back then, but they had plays, right? They had plays, and do not go to stadiums. Yeah, I mean, translate over here as race courses, but okay, like a stadium. Don't go to stadiums for whatever they do in the stadiums, sports, other things, right? Now, people say, okay, we don't, we don't have any Canaanites anymore, right? Sancherib came and mixed up all the nations, right? So nobody knows, who they are, even though the Muslims will claim they go straight back to to Yishmael. It's obvious, problem for all the nations, when Sancherib came along and mixed them all up, obviously, except for the Jewish nation, right? So if all the nations got mixed up, no one can say for clarity at all who they are. They can't say, oh, we came from this one, we came from that one. They all disappeared anyway, right? But to say we have a direct line, we go back to Ishmael, and he messed up all the nations, and he mixed them all together, how can that be? Right? Right? How could that be? Yeah. So at the end of the day, what are we talking about? Right? What are we talking about? We're talking about theater. Yeah. We're talking about, going to horse racing, going to stadiums, right? So someone there, just as a side, will say in 2019 there was a Siyum Shas, right? Finished the entire Talmud. They did in the stadium, very good. So what's the problem? They're not going to they're not going to a stadium there, more than 90,000 people. They're not there participating in a football game. They're not watching a ball game. What are they there for? Cover the Torah. Yeah, the honor, the glory of Torah, which is kind of unbelievable. It's right before COVID. Yeah, it's an unbelievable thing. 90,000 people outside in winter. It was freezing. Yeah, and all these rabbis speak. It was unbelievable joy. 90,000 people. Yeah, what the police say? Not one fight. Couldn't imagine. Couldn't imagine 90,000 people. Yeah, so what's the problem going to the stadium? Where else are they going to do it? Right? You're going to have that kind of crowd. You're not going to do it in someone's backyard. Right? So where are you supposed to do it? So you can take a stadium and sanctify it and use it for good things. Right? It doesn't mean it's totally off limits for everything. Here, Rashi's saying very clear, why is it forbidden? Because what's going on there? Yeah, if there were Torah discourses going on there, would it be permissible? Should be. Because bad things are not going on there. If you're telling me there are things going on there, theaters going on there, you're telling me there's racehorsing going on there, you're telling me there's movies going on there, there are ball games going on there. That I hear. Right? That I hear. That makes perfect sense. Why you shouldn't even go into any of these places. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Now, if I take one of these places, and I use it to sanctify God's name, that's 90,000 people. 90,000 people. Imagine if this was a soccer game or football, depending if you're in Europe. Yeah, you had 90,000 people in the stadium. You're gonna tell me it's not gonna be one fight? There's always fights. Soccer stadiums, football stadiums, whatever. Buy American football. There's always a fight somewhere. It's like, what do you think? The security has nothing to do there. You get 50,000 people there, 30,000 people there. And everyone's like, playing on the guitar, singing "Kumbaya." I don't think so. There are people getting fights. I'm not saying the whole stadium, gets in a fight. Whatever. There are fights. People get in fights. Yeah. And a lot of times people go to these things, they drink. That's what happens. Then someone says something to someone else, someone interferes. So, the majority of the time, probably something happens at every game. I would think, with the type of crowd that goes, it's going to be fights. Yeah, at least one. At least one. Right? Tell me not going to be any fights? You tell security, football season open up today. Yeah. You say, okay, weather's good, probably in most places, not so cold. Yeah, not so cold yet anyway. You got a, sold out stadium, you got, 40,000 people there. 50,000 people there. You got tailgate parties, got all kinds of things going on. But at the game itself, now, you take all the security people there, hundreds of people there working with security, very good. So you take them in a room and say, okay, let's analyze this. How many fights you think they're going to be today? That people are going to get arrested. 1, 5, 10, 0. Not one person, guaranteed, with all the money I don't have, guaranteed nobody's going to say 0. Nobody's going to say 0. They know. They know who their clientele is. Yeah, they know exactly who their clientele is. The sanctification of God's name, right? The Kiddush Hashem that happens, with 90,000 people, not to mention, it was outside, it was freezing, even though, it didn't snow, it didn't rain. That was a pretty big miracle also. But, you don't know what kind of weather you're going to get, certainly in the winter. But what happened? 90,000 people don't want to rest. Not one misdemeanor, nothing. Is what the police said. It's an unbelievable sanctification of God's name. Any other stadium, any other venue that would have been there, somebody's getting arrested, somebody's going to fight. That's just the way it is, right? Someone asked, does it depend on the context? What does Rashi say here? These things, you can't frequent them. The theaters and race courses, for what? Why can't you go there? Because of the things going on at the time. If you had something kosher going on there, could you go there? Why not? It's not like going into a church for a Jew. They're almost under any circumstance going to be forbidden. There is a whole question, if voting, right? If you're going to vote, can you walk into a church to vote? Now, you're not obviously worshiping it. You're walking in. You're going to go to some back room somewhere and people are going to vote, whatever, different rooms. Okay. There's no church service going on there. So that's different. Why? Because the whole thing is forbidden to walk into. Yeah. Going to a stadium would only be forbidden, or should only be forbidden, if it's something that's going to be forbidden that's going on there. Yeah. A concert. Someone go to a stadium, go to a concert. Yeah. Let's say a guy singing, we'll make it easy. So you don't have a problem with Kol Isha. That a guy can't listen to a woman sing. So let's say it's only a guy. Right? We'll make it very simple. Right? Make it very simple. Could a person go to a concert in the stadium? Now, what could a person say? What could the claim be? Claim be very simple. I'm here to listen to music. I want to listen to music. Now, what kind of crowd goes to concerts? You say, well, I went to a concert. Other people have gone to concerts, right? Is it, they don't listen to music. Yeah, probably they do other things also. Okay. But in that venue, now, technically, you'll tell me there's nothing wrong with it. They're going to listen to music, right? Now, there is an argument here. There would be an argument. What's the argument? Secular music. Could you go to a concert to, secular music? Yeah, on Chol Moed, or an intermediate day of Passover, Sukkot. There are always concerts with Jewish singers, religious singers, in different stadiums. So how can they do that? That would be the obvious question. You can't go there for that either. Even though it's going to be a sanctification of God's name, people that listen to music. And other things. People spend a lot of money to do it. They go, what's the problem? Yeah, they're using it for a sacred purpose. Now, you can argue, maybe, right, this gets into a bigger discussion, you can argue maybe it's not the best thing in the spirit of the holiday, right, to go to a concert, right, to go to a, then you got a problem if it's mixed. You got men and women, right? You don't have women singers there. So, okay, so you have men singers, very good. But is it separate? It's a separate seating, right? That's, modesty issues here. Okay. So I remember years ago, and it still goes on, I'm sure, on Chol Moed, or an intermediate day of a festival, whether it's on Sukkot or on Passover, what can you have? You can have a circus. Literally a circus. Yeah. So I remember seeing these ads years ago. You know, before concerts were big. They had a circus. I mean, literally a circus. Trapeze things, other things, whatever. A circus. So I asked somebody this question years ago, many, many years ago. How is this permissible? How in the world is it permissible? Right? If you're going to go to such a thing, whatever it's going to be during the intermediate days of a holiday, yeah, does it fit the criteria of having some holiness there? Is it in the spirit of the holiday? That's the question. That is the question. So you could argue. A concert may be in the spirit of the holiday. That you could argue. Yeah, that's probably a good argument if it's done in a modest way. Yeah. You have separate seating, whatever. How can you justify a circus? A circus is totally different. Yeah. Yeah. Even if you have modesty issues. Let's say, people doing the trapeze act were men. Okay. Yeah, let's say. And they were dressed kind of modestly. Okay, whatever. Right? Grasping at straws here. But let's say you don't have any modesty issues. You have zero modesty issues. Okay. Now, if I have zero modesty issues, how is that in the spirit of the holiday? If I go to an amusement park, same thing. Right? There's a whole question on that also. There are groups that go, people that go to amusement parks during this time, during the intermediate days. Yeah, weather permitting. How could you do that? How could you do that? Yeah, it's an amusement park. So I would put an amusement park and a circus. I put them together. I put them in the same, two peas in a pod. I put them together. Yeah, I don't see any difference. Right? So both are not in the spirit of the holiday. That's for sure not. Yeah. So I asked somebody this question, right? Let's get to the answer here. So I asked someone this question. I said, how could they advertise it? Or even better, how could they go? So someone told me the people who are going to go, it's better they go to these things that are quote unquote kosherized than to go to other things. I mean, it's not really an answer. You're hitting the least common, the least common element, or least common denominator, let's say. So you're talking, let's say someone is much more modern. Okay. So you take something that's kosher that you wouldn't necessarily do, but you take something that's kosher so people do something in a kosher way instead of a non-kosher way. Okay. But that's who you're catering to. That's exactly who you're catering to. So isn't it better they do that, than they do other things? You could argue that. You certainly could argue that. But in any case, you're right. Right? Someone's like, a frummie, we'll say a real frummie, they're not going to go to something like that. That's not in the spirit of the holiday. Right? Now, I do know that NCSY, there's a National Council of Orthodox youth, that they go on usually on I think they have for both. I think they have for Sukkot and for Passover, the intermediate days. They have a day, they rent out the park. Six Flags. Six Flags Great Adventure. Now, NCSY is a group where their goal is to, draw kids closer to Torah. Yeah, kids will go to public school. That's what they do, right? That is their function, right? That's what they do, right? So I mean, it's a good thing. Brought many, many people close to Torah, made them from. Very good. Yeah. Now, weather permitting, usually one day during Sukkot or Passover, they rent out New Jersey, Six Flags. Six Flags Great Adventure. Yeah, it's an amusement park. Anyone doesn't know, right? It's an amusement park. Now, why are they bringing their kids there? First of all, They want to give them a fun time, even though, sometimes weather doesn't permit. Sometimes it's cold. I remember once I went with somebody, and like as whatever, it's like a chaperone, I guess. And whatever, it was cold. It was like 40 degrees. It was like it was like 6, 7 degrees Celsius. Cold. Sukkot can be cold, right? In New York, New Jersey. So like, some of the kids were like, "Oh, we're freezing, we're gonna die of frostbite." I was like, "No, come on, this is great. Come on, like whatever, right?" But why are they doing it? They're not doing it because this is the best thing to do, on an intermediate day of the holiday. It's in the spirit of the holiday. They're doing it to give these kids a good time. So they're gonna have good thoughts about what Judaism is. It's not just about, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that. They show them a good time, So they do it for the sake of outreach. Sake of outreach, that's a different issue. I'm not saying everything's permissible for the sake of outreach. But if you're going to take kids and they're going to have a great time and they're going to think Judaism is great and want to, learn more or, go to a Jewish school, that's huge. That's a huge thing. So good. That has a purpose, right? That has a purpose. But in general, right? Let's get back to the question here. In general, is this something, that most Orthodox Jews should want to go to? And the answer is no, shouldn't. Now, there'll be a more modern element that won't say anything wrong with it, right? There'll be a sukkah on premise. I'm sure they'll have at least more than one sukkah on premise, so you can eat the sukkah. So you don't have a problem with sukkah, right? Or, if it's during Passover, they'll have kosher food for Passover, right? No one's going to be lacking in any amenities here, right? So you have the best of both worlds. I got my sukkah, I got my kosher food, I got an amusement park. What's the big deal? Right? So for more modern elements, they will see no problem with this. They won't see any issue with it at all. People more religious, they'll say, whether it's permissible to go to an amusement park or not, that's another issue. That's a whole different issue. We're talking about specifically here going on the intermediate day of a holiday, which just about every rabbinic authority would say that's on the spirit of the holiday. That's not what should be done. But someone told me that's the permissibility. Not just for Jewish outreach. The permissibility is for if you're going to say going to a circus in general should be forbidden, right? Let's say 100% should be forbidden. You're not allowed to go in the ways of non-Jews. That's one way, let's say, right? Let's say. Nonetheless, if they're going to go to worse things, here you're taking something kosher. Essentially, let's say better. You're taking something that really you shouldn't do, but you're kosherizing it in a way that you make it permissible. Now, let's say here in Israel, they have amusement parks. Yeah. Can't go to an amusement park? Why not? Not the same thing as going to their stadiums or whatever, and learning after their actions. Well, you can make it in a kosher way. You can for sure make it in a kosher way, right? But we're talking, so first of all, in this case, it's going to depend on timing. If during the year in a kosher way, it's okay. Okay. If you're telling me it's going in their ways and it should be forbidden, good. Yeah, we're not talking about that. Here we're talking about a specific case where they made it in a kosher way, where, you got kosher food, it's done in a modest way, let's say. So you have everything going for yourself. You have one problem. You only have one problem, right? What's the one problem? What's the one obvious problem? It's during the holiday. It's during the intermediate day of a holiday where you have an obligation to wear Shabbos clothes. You have an obligation to have at least one meal, right? That has, has meat, drink wine, let's say, right? So, it's a holiday where a person shouldn't work if possible, right? In the intermediate days, if you have to work, you have to work. But these are holy days, right? These are holy days. Now, someone there mentions, I just want to hit that part because it's an important part. Someone asked, good question, a very good question, right? And that is, what about Bithul Torah? Good question. What about wasting time? You could have learned Torah. Okay. Is it permissible on the intermediate day of a holiday to go on a trip? Now, some say it's problematic because let's say today a person's going to go in a car, right? Let's say, most likely. Or here, probably people go on buses or rent cars, whatever. What if your car breaks down? What if your car breaks down? So if it's something you yourself could fix, then you can get it fixed. Yeah. If it's something you need an expert to fix, then you can't get it fixed. Right? So there would be a question. I'm just going to throw out the question. It's not really a question, but there would be a question if that's the case and that's what we're worried about, that you can't travel. You can't go anywhere. Families can't get together because you're worried something's going to happen. Now, obviously, that can't be the halacha. That's not the halacha. That's not what we do, practically speaking. Families get together. They go out. People go hiking. People do other things. Okay, what do you do if you need a sukkah? So it could be that a person just eat things that you don't need a sukkah. Let's say if it's on sukkahs, or if it's during the intermediate days of Passover. People go to parks. A lot of people go to parks. During this time. I mean, sukkahs it's harder. If you bring a pop-up sukkah or something, right? Nonetheless, let's say that wouldn't be a problem. You want to go out with your kids. Person wants to go out with their kids. I want to go to a park somewhere. Not a local park. Let's go somewhere else. Somewhere else that, they don't live nearby. I want to check out another park, another place, this, that. Is that a problem? Why should be a problem, right? Families getting together, family goes, right? Say, you tell me about the car could break down. You're right. Do I have to worry the car's going to break down? Doesn't matter what type of car it is. I mean, we can break this down ad nauseum, right? If it's older than 10 years, maybe you shouldn't be allowed to go. If it's within 10 years, maybe you're allowed to go. Didn't have problems, didn't have problems. We can make questions up the gazoo, right? Certainly could do that. But nobody's saying that. No rabbinic authority saying that, right? They're saying family can get together, right? That's part of the enjoyment of the holiday. You get together, you go. Right? Rent a car, you take a bus, whatever. Right? Or you have a car and you go. So that's what you do. Right? Maybe it's gonna break down. Maybe it could happen. Okay, but regardless if it constantly breaks down or not, I don't have to worry about it. Right? It's part of the enjoyment of the holiday. So they're not gonna forbid, rabbis are not gonna forbid enjoyment on the holiday based on something that is a way out concern that probably won't happen. Right? And enjoying the holiday with family is a bigger thing. A much bigger thing. Right? Now the only question is, where do you go? That's the question. You go to a place that's, a person has kids, kids can run around, kids can rollerblade, right? I used to visit people, used to live on the coast. Or not so much on the coast, whatever, I don't know, a good hour and a half, I guess, from me, but they had a place. There's a place right near the house where they had this huge ring. People could ride scooters. They could go on rollerblades. It was good. Kids could run around, and the huge park there. Of course, all these places, during these intermediate days are always packed with, with religious people because they want to get out. They aren't been in the house and, whatever. Want to get out. If the weather's good, usually, certainly on Sukkot here, the weather's usually good, right? No matter how late it is. So, people want to get out, as long as, God forbid there are no, rockets and it's relatively safe. So, people want to get out. So, is there a problem with that? Not a problem with that, right? It's a family outing. Right? And, and it's a whole thing. Kids want to say, I want to do this. Others say they want to do that. They want to do other things. Okay, within the spirit of what the holiday is, that's not a problem. Right? That's not a problem. So the question would be, I remember, when I was in New Jersey years ago, so they had a thing there where whatever they like small rides, a little bit of rock climbing, some other things. Okay, that a lot of people went to, probably, I'm not gonna say everybody went to, but in a religious area, a religious neighborhood, all these places are always packed, right? They're always packed. So that wasn't your normal type of, what do you call it? what's it called? Like an amusement park. Wasn't really an amusement park. Yeah, there was some small things for little kids, whatever. They had this like rock climbing thing, whatever. But like that was it. It wasn't like roller coasters and other things, and right. So relatively speaking, it was tame, right? It was tame. So that's why most people probably permitted it, because it wasn't like you were going to an amusement park, or theater, or any of these things. But the question came up, which I asked like many years ago, and that is this question: you know how could you have a how could you advertise a circus? This wasn't a Jewish circus, it wasn't a kosher circus, it was a circus, right? Barnum and Bailey, right? Anyone remember Barnum and Bailey, right? Back in the day? Yeah, a real circus. A real absolute bona fide 100% circus. Someone told me the people that they're catering to, if you didn't allow it or do it in somewhat of a kosher way, they're going to go to much worse things. They'll go to worse things. Yeah, which would be a total desecration of God's name and not in the spirit of the holiday. So they'll let advertise, let people advertise for it. Yeah, because they're gonna do it in somewhat of a kosher way. And it's better they do this than do other things. Now, person could say, but still, like, where do you find permissibility? Good question. And why isn't it still a problem of going to their things? Right? So you got two issues here. One is you go into the circus. Yeah, you go into the circus in general. And what's the second issue? You're doing it during the intermediate day of a holiday. Two bad things. Two bad things over here. Now, Raj over here says that right? Why do we mention it? Again, frequenting theaters, and let's say, going to the ponies, race courses or stadiums or whatever. So the assumption would be, let's see what the other commentators here do with this, but the assumption would be, simple explanation, as I would say, simple explanation would be when there are forbidden things going on. That's when it's forbidden, i.e., if you're talking about a ball game, right? You're talking about a movie. You're talking about the theater, right? Now, should a person really be learning? Right? That was the question I didn't really address, right? But what are you supposed to do with your kids? Yeah, let's say a person has kids. What are they supposed to do? You got to entertain them. You got to take them somewhere, right? Yeah, okay. Take it apart, depends how old they are. When my kids were younger, it's very easy. Go here, go there. You have to do very much. They get older, you got to find other things. You got to try and find some other things even for older kids. Okay. But even with that, should a guy be sitting and learning? Good question. Yeah, why not? Should be. 100%. Yeah. But that can be trumped. I mean, you got to find time to learn on the holiday. That's true. But that can be trumped by family time. Now you have to have a balance. Let's say you're not going to get out so early in the morning. Yeah. Let's say you're not going to get out so early in the morning. So what do? This guy can pray early and learn till they leave. Yeah, I don't have to necessarily be so involved in getting things together. Maybe he does a little bit. Okay. Right? But you could pack in a couple hours of learning. Before they finally, get out, people get up and they pray and this. Right? So you can spend a couple hours learning. Yeah, probably should. 100%, before they go anywhere. Right? At least you get in some learning. Very good. If you're spending family time and there's a balance, then you don't have that problem. You don't have that problem with Bittul Torah. If, so then there's a question. Okay, in a kosher way, right? They have concerts. There's Jewish singers that The concerts during the intermediate days, right? So people want to go. People want to, people want to hear them, or whatever. Does that mean, like, the father has to go? I don't know. Maybe he has to chaperone, maybe, or if so, you got no choice. You got no choice, right? If you're going to do that, or have someone else do it, and you should be around, right? You be around to learn. You got to have a balance. On Sukkot, there are a lot of simple spatial waves going on. So you have a lot of these synagogues. At least one day during the intermediate days, they bring in a band or people sing or whatever, and people sing and dance. Is that a waste of time? It's not a waste of time. I mean, a person should learn. You got to find time to learn during the holiday also. But there were no greater joy. The Gemara says, Gemara in Sukkah says, no greater joy than seeing the simple spatial wave in the base of Mikdash. Seeing it in the temple itself. People, would stay up all night and, catch a, quick nap or whatever, dancing, singing praises to God, drawing them closer to God. So you can say, what about Bittul Torah? Should they be learning? Well, the different ways to serve God also. You got to learn. No one's saying you don't have to learn. Right? This can also draw you close to God. Yeah? If it's done in the right way. So, nobody looks at that as a waste of time. Some people don't enjoy it. Right? So probably less for women than for men, but some people just, first of all, don't enjoy loud music. That I could understand. They don't like to sing and dance. Okay. Yeah. But that's what gets person into the, into the spirit, tremendously into the spirit after you've gone through Rosh Hashanah, you've gone through 10 days of repentance, right? So you made tshuva, gone through Yom Kippur. And then after Yom Kippur, you come into Sukkot, right? You're basking in God's glory, right? This kind of hut, whatever, doesn't have a roof. You're exposed to the elements, but it's time of great joy. Time of tremendous joy, right? So in time of tremendous joy, there are things to do for tremendous joy. It's time to learn also, right? You gotta find that balance. Some people go all over, to like all kinds of different Hasidic courts, and see what goes on there, and they sing and dance some people like to sing and dance all night. Nothing wrong with it. You gotta learn also, but really there's nothing wrong with it. That's uplifting their soul. So, whatever it takes, to uplift their soul, but it's a tremendous time. It's a tremendous time. Yeah, of great joy. No one's gonna say, Bittul Torah. It's wasted his time, could have learned. Yeah. Now, some people are not gonna stay the entire time. Let's say something starts, let's say at night starts, I don't know, let's say 9 o'clock at night. Usually going to stop probably by 11:15, because, there's a lot of noise or whatever. Is someone going to stay the entire time? Someone stay for, stay for 20 minutes, stay for half an hour, maybe stay for an hour, right? Whatever it is. Someone stay longer. If they're more into it, less into it, whatever. Okay. Now, if someone's singing and dancing, they're enjoying, their spirit is being uplifted. Someone's going to say, come on, that's Bittul Torah? No one's going to say it's Bittul Torah. Even the most, Lithuanian Jew you can get, it's not going to say it's Bittul Torah. Not going to say it's a waste of time. They may not dance and sing as much, okay. Someone who wants it is going to say it's Bittul Torah? No. In family time, it's not Bittul Torah either. There's an obligation for husband to make his wife happy, make his kids happy. Right? It says, when I have to take them somewhere, they need to get out. You've been inside, you worked hard, you put up sukkah, talk about sukkahs, you put up the sukkah, and all that, and you're busy making meals, and it's whatever. So there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do. So what do people want to do? What do people want to do? They want to get out. So a lot of times what we used to do, when my kids were younger, used to visit other families. We used to go there for a meal, we used to hang out there. So I went to a park or whatever. Again, when they got older, it was different. We still do that. I still usually go to, some people's houses, but whatever. I got a few of my kids are married, so whatever, get together with them, as well. And, so they have younger kids, so good. So, you find things, not so hard to entertain them. When they get older, okay. Right. So, people go to parks, not a problem. Family time's not a problem with Bittul Torah. That for sure is not a time. No, it's not going to be a claim of wasting time when you could have learned. Certainly for a guy. But, I would say, before they go out or when they get back, sometimes it's hard because, he just, exhausted, from the whole thing. But nonetheless, what it can do is what a person can do is they can, they go in before. They learn a couple hours before. They got in that time to learn. And sometimes people don't get out until later anyway. So like you got all this wasted time anyway. So why not? Why not learn? If you can. So then you made then you did the best of both worlds. You fulfilled your obligation to learn, right? You sat and you learned, very good. You got inspired a little bit, very good. And you spent family time, right? So you killed two birds with one stone. Yeah. So that wouldn't be a problem. So this whole case, right? I'll start taking questions, huh? Right? This whole case is talking about going to a place, going to a theater, or stadium, or what do you call it, racehorse and other things, right? These type of things that customs of, that's the general custom of what people do, in that place. When these things are going on, when these things are going that are forbidden, so a Jew shouldn't be there. Now, again, technically speaking, a Jew, Orthodox Jew goes to a ball game, right? We'll deal with this question for a second. Goes to a ball game, football game, baseball game. Okay, I wouldn't say hearing the greatest conversations going on and this and that. Okay, what is the transgression here? Let's say, there are no problems with modesty. Let's say. Okay, so you're saying that people, people curse and other things. Okay, but what's the biggest transgression? The biggest transgression is Bittul Torah. That's the biggest transgression. They're wasting time when they could have learned Torah. You're going to say they wouldn't have learned Torah anyway. Okay, it doesn't matter. But the point is, it's a waste of time. To sit there and, sit there and watch for 2 hours, it takes you like an hour to get there and get back and this and that. It's a whole day, right? Basically, it's your whole day or a good part of your night. That's what it is, right? That's what it is. Wasted. Totally wasted. Yeah? That's the biggest sin you can say. Unless there are moral issues, right? This immorality. You can tell me, let's say, a person goes to a ball game in summer, people aren't dressed exactly the most modest. You can say that's an issue. Okay. You can say a person goes to a football game, and they got cheerleaders there and who knows what. So like, you can use that as an argument. But let's say, right? I'll be very generous today. Let's say that wasn't the case. But that's not the case. If it's not the case, what's the biggest transgression? What is the biggest transgression? The biggest transgression is Bittul Torah. It's wasting time when you could have learned. That is the biggest transgression. I had somebody tell me, 18-year-old kid tells me, if you go to an Orioles game, right, in Baltimore, yeah, they have a kosher stand in Camden Yards, right? That's where the Baltimore Orioles play. In Camden Yards, yeah, they have a kosher stand there. Okay. So he tells me, again, this person's more modern, obviously, but he tells me, listen, if you're at a ball game, you go to an Orioles game, let's say, they daven mincha, at the end of the fifth inning. End of the fifth inning, right? Pray the afternoon service. I said, what are they making an announcement? Peanuts, popcorn, mincha, right? Right by the kosher stand. So I said, I can't imagine like how much, intention you're going to pray. So what do you mean? He says, feel a bit seaborn. Got to pray with a minion. So if I'm at a ball game, right? This is where all the, crazy ideas come in. And they're going to say, person's going to say, well, if I'm already at a ball game, which probably shouldn't be there, but if you're already at a ball game, feel a bit seaborn. What are you going to say to that? I had to pray with a minion. I got to pray with 10 men. Yeah? Like, what are you going to argue? Kid's right. Right? You're gonna miss, praying mincha, the afternoon service. It's gonna get dark. So you're not gonna have anywhere to pray. Right? So go pray there. Very good. So you fulfill, you get all your desires there. Right? Get all your desires going to the game, you get your spiritual thing, you get kosher food, and I can pray there. Very good. What am I lacking? Exile's been very good, unfortunately. What am I lacking? I got everything. Right? I got everything. Today, a person goes watch the Knicks game or whatever, Madison Square Garden. They got kosher food there. I don't know how kosher it is, but let's say, you get the best of both worlds. You don't think the Orthodox Jews go to ball game? I'm sure they do. Sure they do. They don't think twice about it. They don't think twice about it. So again, what's the biggest thing that's forbidden? If it wouldn't be, people speaking Lashon Hara and people cursing and other things and immorality, what would be the biggest sin? The biggest sin would be Bittul Torah. Now, a friend of mine had a question like this. He grew up more modern, became an ultra-Orthodox Jew, and his father, a blessed memory, was whatever, it's more modern. So the question would be, he wants him to go take his son to a ball game. When he's in the States, he wants him to take him to a ball game in the summer. Is he allowed to go? So now, what do you have? You have Kibbutz Avim, right? Honoring parents' wishes. Now, obviously, you can't do something that's like totally forbidden. Right? If they want you to eat a cheeseburger, you can't do it, even though probably a rabbinic prohibition, right? But they tell you that's great Shabbos, you don't listen to them. It's a big mitzvah not to listen to them, right? Nonetheless, what's the problem? What's the problem? Biggest problem is Bittul Torah, right? Yes, very important rabbi asked him this question. And he said, if you want you to go, you should go. You bond with him more, whatever. But he said, the only thing he found that would be forbidden with the whole thing, right, is Bittul Torah. Wasting time when he could have learned. Now, some would argue, my Rebbe included, would argue that walking into such a place would be forbidden, an honoring parent goes out the window. Even if it would help draw a connection to them and be closer to them. He would say, you don't get around this problem. Obviously, he disagreed here, right? He disagreed. And he said, walking into such a place, no matter what's forbidden. It's forbidden, right? Let's make clear, if it's being used for something that's forbidden, right? If it's used for something for Torah, why can't you go? That shouldn't be an issue, right? Someone there pointed out, Siyum HaShas, very good. 90,000 people, okay. Right, but if you're going to hold in general, walking into a stadium would be forbidden in and of itself, then even for Siyum HaShas, for finishing the entire, this cycle, finishing the entire Gemara, the entire Talmud, where you learn 2 pages a day, and you finish in 7.5 years, it's a huge thing, it's a huge undertaking. Yeah. So according to that, you wouldn't even be allowed to go. You wouldn't be allowed to go. Why not? Because you're walking in the stadium. So if walking in the stadium is forbidden in and of itself, good, then anything, no matter what goes on there, you can't go. Yeah, but that's not the case. That's not the case, right? We have church. They're not there to pray. There's no service going on. You go to some back room somewhere to go vote, right? Church is that place is to vote. Yeah. Could I walk, if there's nowhere else to go. There's nowhere else to go. Could a Jew walk into a church? They're not there to pray. Right? You're definitely not there to pray. 100%. There's no prayers going on. Guess what? It's forbidden for a Jew to walk into a church. Yeah. There are some that may be lenient and say, if there's no service going on or whatever, could I use it? Could I do it? Or let's say, person really has to go to the bathroom. There's no other place around. He goes into a church. Not so simple. Not so simple. Yeah, it should be forbidden. 100% should be forbidden. Nothing to talk about. Should be forbidden. Right? For a Jew to walk in. A non-Jew is a different issue. Right? A non-Jew is the whole question. The whole question, if the Trinity and all that is real idolatry, it's not idolatry, we hold it is. Right? For Jew, for sure it is. For a non-Jew, it's the whole question. The whole difference of opinion. On that. But someone who says walking in church is like a avodah zarah, it's like idolatry. Good. But even so, right? It feels like it, but what's idolatry? Idolatry is if I bow down to something. If I say this is my God. If I give a sacrifice to it, that's idolatry. Yeah. If a person walks into a church, is that idolatry? Church represents idolatry. Good. Did you do idolatry? You didn't do idolatry. No idolatry right now going on. If there would be, that's a problem. It's for sure a problem. Yeah. Yeah. Walking in and of itself is forbidden in either case. Right? Even if you don't bow down to anything, it's forbidden. Yeah. See, right. Feels like idolatry. Right. Even if you don't do idolatry. Right. So there are rabbinic authorities, no question about it, will say you can't do it. For exactly that reason. If you're gonna tell me you don't bow, you're not doing anything, good. Doesn't matter. Fact is, you're walking in such a place, you can't walk into it. Right? Not only that, it's the impurity of the place itself. Rabbi Keskel Evanstein, a blessed memory, when he was in the mirror in Europe, and he had like a 2-minute walk where he lived. He had a 2-minute walk to the yeshiva. So Rabbi Keskel Evanstein, blessed memory, was the spiritual mentor of the yeshiva. There was a mashgiach there. He walked around the entire town. He walked around the entire town. It took, I don't know, 20 minutes, half an hour, rather than walk within 4 arm lengths of a church. Because if it would have taken him 2 minutes to get to the yeshiva, but within those 2 minutes he had to walk near a church. He didn't do it. He walked around the entire town. So when he went the back way, he didn't come in contact with the church. Right? So, today, a person lives in the States or other places, you got churches everywhere. Right? It's very hard to stay clean from that. Very, very hard. Yeah, because you have churches all over the place. So the impurity is immense. It's immense. So some people say, it's not going to affect me. And this, because the person's used to it. The person sees it so much, you get used to it, right? But again, it's tremendously impure, right? It's no question. A Jew to walk in there, absolutely not. Even walking nearby, right? Even walking nearby. That's the question that Rashi asked by Rivki made him. Say that when Rivka went by a study hall, base medrash, Yaakov tried to get out. When she went by a place of idolatry, Esav tried to get out. Commentaries ask, what are you talking about? How could she walk within Dawud Amos, within 4 arm lengths of a church or some place of idolatry? Right? It's forbidden. Right? You shouldn't be allowed to. So they say the answer is that she never got that close. It's just that when Esav felt there was idolatry nearby, he wanted to jump out, but she's never that close. Right? You can ask that question also. Let me, I know it's a loaded topic here. All right, let me deal with some questions here. 1 second. There are some modestly dressed people. Yeah, that's true, right? You go to a ball game anywhere. You're gonna hear foul language. B, probably gonna be a modesty also. Right? But I'm saying if you wouldn't have that problem, if 100% you would not have that problem, then I can understand. Right? I can definitely understand that you don't have that problem. Okay. Right? Then that's the whole question. That would be the whole question. Yeah. But you have problems. I agree. You're not going to get around the other problems. Right? You're not going to get around the other problems. But even if I got around the other problems, again, this is for a guy, not for a woman. But even if I got around the other problems, what am I still stuck with? I'm still stuck with the problem. It's bittul Torah. It's a waste of time when I could have been learning Torah. Maybe. Yeah. Not just what people are going to say and the effect. That's another thing. Right? That's another thing. But I would say, since I did grow up in the state, I was a big sports fan back in the day and very big into entertainment. So I would say that, for certain things, if it's only that, let's say it'd only be sports. Let's say a person, I don't know, that was a Yitzhar. Their big evil inclination was sports. Okay. And anyone's a sports fan, very, not so easy to get out of your system. In any case, yeah. So, is that the worst of all things? I wouldn't say it's the worst of all things. Yeah. I'm not saying it's good, but I wouldn't say it's the worst of all things. I think what the worst of all things today is a smartphone. I don't think there's anything worse than that. Someone told me, head of yeshiva that I used to teach in a little bit. I saw at a wedding months ago, and he told me. So I asked him, how things are going. What's the biggest problem you see today that you haven't seen, and the biggest problem you face today? And he's dealing with more, let's say, modern Orthodox Jews that kids that come from modern backgrounds, whatever, and they try and make them give them a real enjoyment of learning Torah. They take them on trips and all kinds of things. And he said the hardest thing is, he said they don't take away their phone, they don't take away the smartphone. So he said the hardest thing is, even if we go on a trip, even if we take them on a trip somewhere, and a fun trip, we're not planning on something boring, whatever, going to some museum or whatever. You take them on a fun trip, yeah. Some guys you can't get off the bus because they're on the phone. He says you can't get them off the bus. Not everybody, but he said it's a challenge. That is the biggest challenge today. If there's people who are so attached to their phone, and they have everything right in the palm of their hand, you take them, I don't know, parasailing, you take them rock climbing, you take them other places, other very interesting places for them, and they can't get off their phone. Yeah, and some people don't want to participate, don't want to do it, even if they'd have a great time, because they're too attached to the phone. He said that's the single biggest problem. He said he used to be worried, guys go to town, and hang out Thursday nights and after Shabbos and different things and whatever, even mixing with girls or whatever. He said that's not the biggest problem. He said today that's nothing. Today that's nothing. The biggest problem is getting people off their phones. Getting people off their phones. That's the biggest problem. That's the single biggest problem, he told me. So imagine, like, you take a 18, 19-year-old kid. You're gonna take him to like an unbelievable place. Unbelievable place, go-karting, other things, whatever. Gonna have a great time. And you got people who won't do it. They have to go, let's say. They can't stay back, so they have to go. Okay. Yeah. They'd be really, if they didn't have a phone, they'd be, some people have better time, some people worse time, whatever it is. Yeah, you can tell me they're not gonna get off the bus. Some guys are not gonna get off the bus, they just do into their phone watching whatever. He said that's the struggle. That is the struggle of this generation. Right? Single biggest problem today, told modern Orthodox community. Big, among other things. Yeah. That's a huge problem. It's a huge problem. Even the other Orthodox community, okay, not everyone has smartphones. Yeah, a lot of people do, but not everybody does. And I think it's better. Like, someone asked me, says, don't you wish you had one? I said, no. I said I'm on my computer enough during the day. I don't need a phone follow me around. That's handy sometimes, that's for sure. But it's very easy to get addicted to. Very, very easy. In this generation, last generation grew up with these things. It doesn't stop. To the extent we have some people, I couldn't imagine such a desire. People have all kinds of different desires, but there are people that cannot give up texting on Shabbos. Someone told me, yeah, for some people, it's a major, major test. That's something I don't understand. I don't understand. Like, it's such a huge thing. You can't text for one day. 27 hours, you can't text. What's going to be? Like, you tell me it's a rabbinical infraction and this and that. I mean, come on. With all the bad things that, texting is and these phones are and what it leads to and all that, very good. Yeah, one day. So, yeah, someone told me, no uncertain terms. You don't understand. You don't understand the challenge of this generation. For some people, that's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. Not to text on Shabbos. Like I said, in Yiddish, versteht nicht. I don't understand the challenge. People have all kinds of different challenges. Okay. That's one I just, okay, I understand a person texts a lot. Okay. Makes life a lot easier in different ways. Okay. You can't live without her one day. That's how so out of tune. person is, they can't live without it one day. Some people say you don't understand the challenge. For some people, it's a big challenge. Other people, have modesty issues. Yeah. Some women don't want to wear skirts appropriate size. And they're a little bit tighter and they go past the knee and whatever. It's a challenge. Some people are challenged that way. Some people have other challenges. I'm not here to judge either way, right? Just saying, people have different challenges. This is one challenge. To me, it makes no sense. Doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah, you want to text during the week? I get it. You're busy texting this one, that one, the other one. Can't live one day without texting. One day without texting, it's an issue. Among some people, it's an issue, but it's not a small thing. And it's not a small amount of people. Now, I heard about this years ago. Heard about many years ago. And I didn't understand it then. I don't understand it now. I'm going to tell you, I don't understand it. I don't understand the desire for it. I can understand the desire for a lot of things. That's one thing I can't understand. That I can't understand. One day, you can't live without it, without texting. Someone asked for the person's modesty, something you can't control, right? Not looking at the person with a shield in your eyes. Okay. Sometimes, you go to a ball game, let's say, right? Brother goes to a ball game. Now, you're sitting there minding your own business. Yeah, you're watching the game, right? Let's say it's a guy, we'll make it simple. Yeah, he's watching the game. He's busy trying to watch the game. Yeah, and some woman walks by, let's say, not wearing very much. He didn't ask for that. Without me walking by, like, it's a test, right? 100%. Yeah, you can look down, you can look away, but you're in a place of 40,000 people, 30,000 people, 50,000 people. Yeah, that type of environment, especially when the weather is warm, that's going to be kind of hard to do. You don't have separate seating. Imagine separate seating in a stadium. That'd be great. You don't have separate seating. Yeah, you don't get around that problem. And most women, guaranteed, I'll put all the money I don't have again on the fact that most women are not going to be dressed properly. Jews or non-Jews, doesn't matter. Right? They will not be dressed properly. So what do you do? How much can you look down? You won't even see the game. You got to wear dark sunglasses. You won't be able to see anything. So yeah, it's a problem. 100% it's a problem. Right? 100%. Now, somebody message, you get somebody like Joseph, very good. It's pretty amazing he survived there. He survived in Egypt. It's true. Yeah, but who's on that level? Who's on that level in this cream puff generation? Nobody. Right? You're not tempting yourself over here. Right? And someone says, well, if you look and you get excited, it's a problem with you. And I said, if you don't, it's a problem with you. That's a natural instinct. Right? I mean, it's a guide dog. It's a natural instinct. Yeah, unless, like you're dead. Unless your insides, hormones are dead. Okay. Yeah. You don't tempt that. It's not something you tempt. But if it's all around you, like, how's it possible not to see it? It's impossible. You're in a no-win situation. Even if it was a smaller amount of people, doesn't matter. Let's say the stadium only holds 10,000 people, 5,000 people. That can help you? Not going to help you. In this case, not going to help you. Definitely not going to help you. Yeah, let me see other questions here. Non-separate seating is hard because problems talk too much the opposite gender. That's another issue, right? There are some, musicians, Jewish Orthodox musicians, that will not play or not sing, let's say better. They won't sing if the place doesn't have a mechitza, does not have separate seating. That's good. Now, some others will. Some others will. Let's say there are more families there, some families sit together. Okay, but there's always a mixture. There's always a mixture. So I give credit to the ones that say I only play. I'm only going to sing in this type of crowd, and they'll lose money. They for sure lose money because they can get someone else to do it. So there'll only be certain things they'll be able to do. Okay, but you never lose. You never lose keeping Torah. Keep that in mind. But it's a test. 100%. Very big test. Someone asks, very good. If you're not Jewish, still aware of the problem associated with frequent places and events. Does it affect the Gentiles the same way? Yeah. I mean, Gentiles, they don't have an evil inclination. They for sure have an evil inclination. Yeah. In some ways, their evil inclination when it comes to immorality is 10 times greater than the Jews. Look at Gemara says. Yeah, it's much greater. Much greater. We still have an evil inclination. Doesn't mean we don't have an evil inclination, right? But that affects them also. It affects non-Jews the same, it affects them the same way. It definitely affects them the same way. Again, the laws of modesty, let's ask the question. The laws of modesty, apply to non-Jews as part of the Noahide laws. Right? Now most people would tell you no. Right? Most people would tell you probably it doesn't affect me. Right? It doesn't right? It does not, won't have an effect. Won't have an effect. Yeah, but it's not true. Or let's say the laws of modesty don't apply. They don't apply. Now, I would venture to guess that a woman, again, let's say it's summertime, we'll make it easy. Yeah, when it's very warm. So a lot of women, Jews and non-Jews, unfortunately, right, will dress like they're going to the beach. Yeah. They'll dress with very little clothing on. Now, is that a good thing or a bad thing? Now, some people would say, what's the problem? I can dress the way I want. If people look and objectify me, it's their problem. Okay. Now, that's true to a point. To a point. For a Jew, if a Jew, let's say a Jewish woman, God forbid, would dress immodestly, and a Jewish guy looks, let's say, and he starts fantasizing who knows what. Yeah. Does he transgress? Yes. Does she transgress? Yes. What she transgress? Putting a stumbling block in front of him. Now, that doesn't necessarily apply to a non-Jew. That doesn't apply, right? That doesn't apply to a non-Jew. Now, Kaufman would say, even if it doesn't apply to a non-Jew, right? What about a moral imperative? That's something that's good for them. That's something that would be universal. So you can tell me, maybe not. The way of the world, right? The way of the world. So we said before, football season starting today, person goes to the stadium, it's warm in a lot of places. It'd be 70 degrees, 75 degrees. Some places be warmer, some not. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Yeah. Person goes to the stadium, 30,000 people there, 40,000 people there. You don't think there gonna be women in shorts? All right, then are wearing bikinis. Okay. Are there gonna be women in shorts? Probably. Yeah. They're gonna be wearing tank tops or like loose things? Probably. Yeah. So, is that a good thing for them? I wouldn't say that. Never wouldn't say that. Again, this is a guy talking. Can women be objectified, dressing like that? Yes. Is it right? No, it's not right. No one's gonna say it's right. I mean, maybe some will, but is it definitely not, if it's definitely not right? Yes. But they'll say it's a guy's problem. It's a guy's problem. You're right. That is partially true. But the fact that a woman dresses a certain way, I'm not going to say, well, she has it coming and this is what she deserves. I'm not going to go that far, right? The person's got to be in control. Very good. But even so, yeah, if she gets objectified, she says, it's not my fault. A man has to have control. Good. That's true. Yeah, but at the same time, it's good for her. I wouldn't say that. I definitely wouldn't say that. Now, you can't say that's part of the Noahide laws. That wouldn't go, but some would argue, isn't there a basic law of decency? You see, that's not indecent, right? What's the definition of being decent, of being dressed decently? Now, you ask somebody, Jew or non-Jew, doesn't matter. If a woman wears a t-shirt and shorts, is that decent? What if you wear shorts? Yeah, is that decent? They may say they can wear what they want. 100%. What's the problem? Because they're overly exposed. That's the problem. Yeah. They cause people to have bad thoughts. Men and women, right? We'll say men. Okay. So you just said, there's no problem of putting a stumbling block in front of someone if you're a non-Jew. Very good. You're right. So the guy looks, it's his fault. Again, is that a good thing? Right? You got to ask yourself, if a person dresses in such a way or puts himself in that situation, is that good for them? Does that draw them closer to God or not? That's the question. If it does, if there's a question, then you shouldn't do it. If they say no, the way I look, and I don't care if people look at me and this and that, that's my connection to God, and that draws me closer to God. Okay, it's a lie, but okay. Yeah, they can make that argument. Yeah, and if someone objectifies them, they say that's their fault. Okay. Now, if that person was wearing, let's say they're wearing pants, not tight pants, yeah? Let's say they were wearing pants, they get objectified. Is that a guy's fault? Yes. Yeah. Or is he wearing a skirt? Same thing. Same thing. But there's one difference. There, she's dressed more modest. I'm not talking about a tight skirt, right? She's dressed more modestly. Okay. So if guy has thoughts or whatever, it's his fault. Good. But it's less likely in some ways, in many ways, that would be the case unless she was dressed otherwise. But again, it's not good for them. Totally not good for them. Again, let's go on the record here since we are recording here. So, let's go on record. Is it a good thing for women to be objectified? No. Are women objectified? Yes. Has it changed? No. Now, does it help the way they dress? Seemingly, it doesn't help. The way they dress is the problem. 100% the problem. It's a guy's problem for objectifying them. Okay. They can be objectified any way they dress. Good. But if they dress in a worse way, couldn't they be objectified more? Sure. All right, I think that's obvious. So now you ask me the question. Then you ask me the question, well, does this really apply to non-Jews? So what my answer be? I think there's a basic level of modesty even non-Jews should have. 100%. 100%. Again, in today's day and age, that goes out the window. And even back then, we're not living in Victorian England. I mean, time of the Greeks, people were fighting naked in the gymnasium. So everything is relative, right? Everything's relative over here. But I would say, can these things affect them? Sure. It can affect them. It can, a person will say, the way I dress doesn't matter. It's not true. They feel different the way they dress, right? For a guy, let's say, he feels different. He's wearing a suit and a tie. And if he's wearing, let's say, khaki pants or chinos, or let's say, what do you call it? Or like cotton pants, does it feel different? Sure. If he's wearing shorts and a t-shirt, does it feel different? He's not wearing a suit? Yes. 100%. 100%. Can this affect a non-Jew? Yes. That's the answer. Can it affect them? Yeah. Now, they're not going to have the issue of B'tzul Torah, waste of time when they could have been learning, right? So really, going to these things, is it a problem for them? No. I wouldn't say it's a problem for them. And I think it keeps them busy throughout the year, football, basketball, what do you call it? Hockey and baseball, whatever in the States, and soccer and other places, keeps them busy. Keeps them off the streets. Saturdays and Sundays and Friday nights, they're busy. Otherwise, they weren't busy with that. They'd probably be killing Jews more, right? So it's not a bad thing for them to be involved in it. So they'll be involved in it, right? Now, the question is going to be, though, someone's going to ask, is it good? Is it good? It's not forbidden for a non-Jew. Definitely not forbidden for a non-Jew, right? The question is going to be, is it good for them? Right? For a Jew also, the worst thing is B'tzul Torah, is wasting time when you could have learned. Okay. But at the end of the day, is it bad? So we'll say, yeah. People look up to these people. They think they're heroes in different ways. And they shouldn't be, and how they live the lifestyle. Good. That's why we're not going to idolize them. Because they can shoot a ball or hit a ball or kick a ball or, whatever. Now, wouldn't we say, for a non-Jew, right? Should non-Jew idolize these people? I don't see why. Should be no difference. You don't want them, you don't want them to be idolized. I mean, if you knew half the things they do in their personal life, you never watch them. But nobody cares. Nobody cares whatsoever. They just want to see them hit a ball or shoot a ball. That's all they want. They don't care what goes on in their, what goes on in their, in their private life. All I have to see, usually in the off season, you see like how many people got arrested and, different things, and got caught carrying weapons and going viral and different things. You see how people live. See what they do. They don't know the ins and outs. Okay. Yeah, they're not living a moral life. Most of them. I'm not going to throw everyone under the bus, but most of them. That's a lifestyle. You want to emulate that, you want to emulate that lifestyle now. Of course, we'll say no, right? I don't want to go near what they do, but I like the way they play, right? Isn't that a contradiction? Certainly for a Jew. Why isn't that a contradiction? In other words, they go against everything you stand for and what they do and how they act, right? So how can you watch them? And what's the answer? What's the obvious answer? The obvious answer, someone's going to say, I could care less. I could care less what they do in the off season. Within reason. I could care less. What do they care about? How they play, right? How they shoot, how they hit. They don't care about anything else. They don't care what goes on in their personal life, right? So we'd say not that way, right? And what's the obvious proof? Right? We go back in time. What's the obvious proof? The obvious proof is Aristotle. Now, Aristotle, one of the greatest minds in the history of man, no question, right? No one's going to doubt, how great he was, at least mind-wise. But he was an animal. He acted like an animal. He got caught doing horrific things. So his students once caught him. Doing something. He said, Aristotle, what are you doing? How can the great Aristotle be doing this? So he says, it's Aristotle, the great philosopher, the great mind. It's Aristotle does other things. So we don't say that. We don't compartmentalize. We don't say like Bertrand Russell went to my alma mater back in the day, right? Bertrand Russell was teacher of ethics, professor of ethics, but he's totally unethical. So his students asked him once, how could you teach ethics and be unethical? What was his answer? His answer was, if I thought mathematics, expect me to be a square. He's like, so what if I teach ethics? Yeah, so I'm teaching her the principles of what it means to be ethical. Good. Doesn't mean I have to be ethical. Yeah, but that's a total contradiction. How can you teach ethics and not be ethical? You could argue. You could say, listen, he's got an evil inclination. We all have evil inclinations. No, if you're teaching something, if you know you're making money from it or not, that doesn't even matter. But you're supposed to be an expert in this field. Yeah? So if you're an expert in ethics, so to speak, you know all about ethics and all about the other nations and what they do and don't do and this and that. So how could you teach her to be unethical? Yeah, I said, what's the problem? No contradiction. Judaism is a major contradiction. Jews and non-Jews, it should be a contradiction. Yeah? You have to be who you're supposed to be. Doesn't mean we don't have an evil inclination, right? The words of the book, of the good book, the Torah itself, you got to keep as a Jew, right? And whatever Noahites have to keep, right? We don't compartmentalize. We make mistakes, 100%. We can make mistakes. We can make serious mistakes. Yeah, thank God there's repentance. Thank God there's tshuva. But at the same time, person say, well, what do you want? You don't expect me to be, a square, but again, right? Famous story, right? Another famous story. My Rebbe was on a boat many, many years ago. And there was a Rebbe on boat. And he said this non-Jewish doctor was giving a whole talk about smoking. So he said, go listen. He said, you understand English, whatever. Go listen and tell me what he says, right? So he went. His doctor gave a whole schmooze. This is before smoking was, all the information about smoking was out there and how bad it is. And his doctor went soup to nuts how bad smoking is and what it does to you. This is even before it became public knowledge. So he speaks for like 40 minutes, 45 minutes. 10 minutes later, my Rebbe sees him. He sees him smoking a cigarette. So he asked him, I don't understand. You just spent 45 minutes speaking about how bad smoking is. He says, how in the world can you light up a cigarette? He says, I know it's going to kill me. I know it's going to take years out of my life, but it's so enjoyable. Even though it's going to take years out of my life, I can't stop. Now forget about it's addictive and other things. We're not even going to go there. It's such an enjoyment. It's going to kill you. It's totally going to kill you. So what? Right? That's compartmentalization. Yeah. Knowing what the right thing is and then going directly against it. Yeah, that's not a Jewish concept. Now, it doesn't mean you don't have an evil inclination. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a case where you know something's bad, let's say. You know it's really bad. You don't care. You don't care what the effect is because the enjoyment is so great. Yeah. It's gonna take years out of your life. So what? Yeah. So obviously, somebody like that, they just live according to base desire. Because they live according to the enjoyment they're gonna get in this world. That's what they live for. Yeah. Even if it's gonna kill them. So what? It's still enjoyable, you can never give it up. So what happened to intellectual honesty? Rubbish, as the English would say. What do you mean intellectual honesty? He doesn't care, right? He wants to enjoy it, he wants to enjoy his enjoyment. His enjoyment is going to cut out years of your life. So what? But isn't that ironic? You have someone, back in the day before all this information was published, right? How bad smoking was. And he understands how bad smoking is. To want to stop? To even try and stop? Forget about nicotine is addictive. Okay. But to want to stop and give up enjoyment? Even if it's gonna, even if it's gonna take years out of my life, that's not a Jewish concept. That is not a Jewish concept. Now, it might be hard to stop, might be difficult, there's addiction involved. Yes, that's true. Right? But that's not what he's saying. He's saying it's so enjoyable, I don't care. So that means even the most enjoyable things, even if it's detrimental to your health or mental health or other things, why stop? Right? Big problem. Big, major contradiction. Right? With the Judaism, you don't have that contradiction. You got to live what it says. You got to do what it says. It's hard. You're right. And repentance is hard. And change is hard. And all these things are hard. Very good. Yeah, it doesn't mean I don't have to try. I mean, I don't have to work hard. I just throw it out there that, it's too hard. I'm going to be the same person I'm going to be anyway. I'm not going to change. So what's the point? Okay, some people say that. And they'll give up before they start. Okay. You got to start somewhere. Right? But instead, I'm going to get enjoyment for the sake of enjoyment, even if it takes years out of my life. That's, it's kind of suicide in certain ways. Right? It's dangerous to do that. Yeah. But again, the person says, so what? So I'll live less. I'll live less years, but I'll enjoy them because it's what gives me enjoyment. Does that make logical sense? Doesn't make logical sense. It only makes sense when you say I can do what I want, when I want, how I want, and whatever desire I want, I should be able to do. But it's going to kill you. It's going to take years out of your life. So that's not rational. Right? It's not rational. So I would agree, as we said before, right? Non-Jews don't have the obligation, right? 100%. 100% in this case, non-Jews do not have an obligation. Kaufman would say as a moral imperative, they should. It should be more modest. It's better for them. 100% is better for them. Now, it's better for their families. Better the way they're looked at in the world. Now, you're going to pin me down. You're going to say, is that an obligation to know I'd laws? No. Definitely not. Is it a moral imperative that would be a good thing to do? Yes. Yeah, but you don't have to. A person wants to go to ball games, let them go to ball games. Not a problem. They're going to get bad values probably. They're going to hear cursing, nothing. Okay. It does affect them. It will affect them, but they're not obligated. They're certainly not obligated. Yeah. Yeah, Ghost is hard. Exile is hard. That is true. Someone has. Okay. Out of topic question. All right. 1 second before I get there. Yeah. Let me deal with this out of topic question. So, Romans conquered Jerusalem in 63 fourth common era. Okay. Almost the same things written in the book of Ezekiel 38, 39. Right. Yeah, that is the speaks about the war of Gog and Magog, right? Can that prophecy be already fulfilled by the Romans? No. The reason is many think, let's say better, many think that World War I, World War II was the war of Gog and Magog. Yeah, and that's nothing's going to be, a World War III, and most of the world's going to die. It's going to be a spiritual war, not a physical war. Now, the problem with saying that is that if you look at what Ezekiel says in chapter 38, 39, if you look at Malachi chapter 14, talks about when he talks about Gog and Magog, the end of days, it definitely seems that it's going to be a massive bloody war. Yeah, it's going to take 8 months. 8 months to bury people. 8 months. I mean, you're talking about tens of thousands, millions of people to be buried. Now, Vilna Gaon, bless the memory of Elijah Vilna, more than 300 years ago, or about 300 years ago, said that if there is going to be a war, then it's only going to take 12 minutes. That's what the students of the Vilna Gaon said in the name of the Vilna Gaon. That's what they said in his name. Now, the Vilna Gaon lived, let's say, 275, 280 years ago. Let's say. This is before missiles. This is before nuclear weapons. So Vilna Gaon was talking about something nuclear, or ballistic missiles, or whatever. So if you look at the prophecies in general, it's very hard to imagine, as some may say, that's going to be a physical war. That's really going to be a spiritual war. Very hard to imagine, right? I mean, 8 months or 7, 8 months, of burying bodies, right? It doesn't sound nuclear. Otherwise, people just get vaporized. But in general, I would say that, yeah, it's going to be a physical war. Now, the Messiah, if you're going to talk about the war of Gog and Magog, and the Messiah is going to come, the Messiah has to do certain things, right? You have to have an ingathering in the exiles. You have to have the temple being rebuilt, right? And he can't die in the process. At least the Messiah of David cannot die in the process. Now, that being the case, so you want to make the claim that the Romans conquered Jerusalem in 63 in the Common Era, right? Before the Common Era. Very good. Did the Messiah come? Didn't come. The war of Gog and Magog is going to lead to the Messiah coming, right? The Messiah come, right? Forget about the Christians. Messiah didn't come. Were there ingathering the exiles? Some. Yeah, when they came back, very good. Yeah, when they came back, but not everybody came back. So you didn't have a full ingathering the exiles. Right? So you didn't have it. It was not fulfilled. Right? So therefore, even though it's tremendous destruction, that is true, right? Nonetheless, Messiah has to come and certain other things have to happen. And it hasn't happened. Some thought after World War I, after World War II, that, yeah, you're going to have the Messiah come. That didn't happen. But regardless, what happened after World War II? The state of Israel was created, given to the Jewish people. All right, then the Arabs attacked and all that. So that's one thing that came out of the Holocaust. Now, some will say that's the beginning of the redemption because the Jews are in Israel. Okay, but there's a Medrash in Tehillim and Psalms that says that when the Messiah comes, all the Jews are going to be in the desert. Now, the question is on that, is that literally? Do we take that literally or not? Remember, my Rebbe told me this and whatever. And I was taking him somewhere, and he said, yeah, there's a Medrash that says that we're not even going to be in Israel. Even if we're here now, it doesn't mean we're going to be there then. So you have this big smile. I'm like, what are you laughing at? I said, you meant to be, around the time. You're also going to be here. You're also going to be in the desert. I'm like, what are you laughing at? Yeah. So is that literal? I mean, you put a left-wing government in here, they give away a lot of the land and then make it indefensible, and the Jewish people get thrown out, right? Is that plausible? Anything plausible. I mean, Abe Barak, I'm not going to get into politics, wanted to give 95% of the West Bank. And Arafat didn't take it, thank God. Be indefensible today. Surrounded on all sides. That's why they took it over. Exactly why they took it over. They're being attacked on all sides. Right? It's the heart of the country. Yeah. Now, Could they give that away? Theory. If you had a left-wing government, in theory they could. I don't know. Can't imagine today, but even with everything, with all that, could I imagine that this medrash is going to happen? Hard to imagine. Israel's got nuclear weapons. Don't tell anyone, right? We got a very strong army. Could it happen? It could happen. Would I bet all the money I don't have on it? No, I wouldn't bet on it. I wouldn't think it's going to happen, right? But at the end of the day, many will say we're living, in the time of the Messianic era. There are a lot of signs, as the Gemara says, that we're living in the time of the Messianic era. But certain things have to happen. And if those things don't happen, then even if there's like serious destruction, doesn't mean that the war of Gog and Magog happened. Again, many held World War II and World War I took care of that. And really, it's going to be a spiritual war. I mean, it's hard to say. It could be. That's what Yechezkel's talking about, right? It's going to be like massive destruction. Okay, yeah, but other things didn't happen though. So if other things didn't happen, then that can't be true, because other things have to happen in order for that to be true. Yeah. So someone mentions that, Mashiach ben Yosef is going to come before. Okay. Right? Certain things he's going to do, and he could die in the process. He for sure could die in the process, difference of opinion whether he does or not. Right? But in the process, the Messiah that comes from the house of David, comes from the tribe of David, let's say, cannot die. Right? That was the mistake Rabbi Akiva made. And that's where the Rambam learns this from. Because he thought Bar Kokhba, Bar Koziva, as he was known, he thought he was the Messiah. Yeah, and what happened to Bar Kokhba? He died. He got killed. Yeah, so the Rambam learns from that the Messiah of David cannot die in the process. Right? He may die afterwards, but he can't die in the process of doing what he needs to do. Right? So the Messiah of Yosef could. He could. Right? There is... Whatever. There's a question. The Gemara asks the question. It's Gemara and Sukkah. There's a question whether the Messiah of Yosef is going to die or not, and the answer is we don't know. Right? The Gemara doesn't answer. Gemara leaves it as as a question. So the Messiah of Yosef, could die. In theory, could die. Yeah, we don't know if he will or not. The Messiah of David at a certain point cannot die, right? He's going to build the temple. He's going to bring in the exiles, right? Some other things he has to do, but he can't die in the process. He may die later. It doesn't matter, but he can't die in the process, right? And again, the Rambam learns out from what happened to Bar Kokhba, because he believed Bar Kokhba was the Messiah. And the problem was, Bar Kokhba died. Bar Kokhba was killed. Right? And because he was killed, so he understood that. So Rabbi Akiva admitted he was wrong, and he made a mistake. And the fact that he made a mistake, he said, he learned out that the Messiah can't die in the process. And that's where the Rambam gets it from. Someone asked, people have more connection, back to texting on Shabbos. Yeah, prevents them from using muktzah if they feel Shabbos lonely. It can be hard. Yeah. Yeah, that very well could be. They just got, find Shabbos being boring. It's not exciting. So, so they text or whatever. That could be. Doesn't include the pro-Israel hostage focus gatherings. No. Nothing to do with anything. This whole thing, could get the world totally against Israel, for what they're doing. So this whole thing, could that eventually lead, to a war of Gog and Magog? Could. You had a coalition that, the Americans, Brits, the Germans, and others, against Iran and, back in Israel, and they could come to the conclusion, as the Malbim says, like, why are we fighting and protecting Israel? It's all their fault. And they all march towards Jerusalem. as the Malbim says, and then the Messiah comes. Yeah, that very easily could happen. So even with pro-Israel gatherings, then you get fights all over the world. Anytime you have a pro-Israel gathering, you got these thugs that come, and try and disrupt it, or you have anti-Israel protests, and they're always violent. You ever notice that? Like they're always like destroying property and other things. You have a a pro-Israel thing, like no one gets hurt, nothing happens unless they get antagonized or whatever. So these hostage focused gatherings. I mean, listen, could it lead to the end of days? Anything could. People thought, when Russia went into Ukraine, it's going to be the end of days, right? It's going to bring, a world war, a major world war. Yeah, but that's not what he wants. I mean, he's an egomaniac and he wants Russia to be great like it was before, but nonetheless, he's not interested in fighting the world. He's having a hard enough time with Ukraine, right? He's not interested in taking over the world, right? But, people thought that was going to be, the end of the day. The world's a powder keg, right? Keep in mind, the world is an absolute powder keg. You have, very big or very, nice sized minorities, Muslim minorities, like all over Europe. You got in America also and other places. They could shut down a country like tomorrow if they wanted to. Yeah, they did that in France a number of years ago. France, okay, you tell me not such a great world power, but yeah, they are kind of a world power. It took them 3 weeks. 3 weeks to shut it down. 3 weeks. You're a place in England, place in France that police will not go into. Yeah, in these areas. Yeah, they know not to go into these areas. So could there be an uprising at any time? All these places, sure. Yeah, and that's what the Malbim seems to say. It's going to be a difference of opinion between Esav and Yishmael, right? Edom and Yishmael. Edom is the Western world. Yishmael being the Muslims. They're going to have differences of opinion, go figure, right? And they're going to have this major bloodbath, and then they're going to realize, oh, why are we doing everything? Why are we fighting against each other? It's all the Jews' fault. They're going to march to Jerusalem. That's going to be the end. That's going to be the beginning of the end. Now, if someone asks me, do you think that's the way it's going to go? Well, that's the way it looks. 100% that's the way it looks. Now, can it happen that way? Can it happen, any number of ways. I mean, as the Medrash says that, the war of Gog and Magog is going to start with the king of Paras. Where's Paras today? Modern day Iran. So it could happen that way, right? I think the writing's on the wall. The question is how it's going to manifest itself and where's it going to go. So nobody knows, right? One person in a generation knows, but everyone else, it's all conjecture, right? It's all conjecture. But, I don't think we're that far off. I definitely don't think we're that far off. What's going to be the end? Don't know. Right? Definitely don't know. But I would say that I think the way the Malbim brings it down, I would think that that's the way it's going to go. But who knows? Nobody knows. Somebody mentions here that immodest dress crazy draw more attention. Very good. That's the whole point. That is exactly the point. If a person dresses that way, what do they want? They want people to see their body. Even if they say that's the way I dress, it doesn't matter. But people dress in a provocative way, or they could dress in a provocative way. Yeah, they could be more modest if they wanted to. They don't want to be. Why? They want to show off their body. Very good. Yeah, that's true. That 100% I would agree with. Yeah, they'd be. Again, they could say, "I want to dress the way I want." Okay. So why do they dress that way? Because they got nice curves. They want to show the world what they have. Okay. Yeah, I hear that. Definitely hear that. You're like learning Torah from an atheist. Yeah, I mean everything by heart still wouldn't make any sense. Yeah. Listen, there are people that can memorize things and say things. They have no idea what it means. Rabbi mine of blessed memory told me once, as a teenager, he had these two priests come, came to him and they want to learn some Talmud. So they started like going through the Talmud verbatim, right? A certain tractate verbatim. This one says this one says this, and they argue about this, and they argue about that. So he started asking them questions. He just started asking them like detailed questions about what their arguments were about and different things, and they had no answers. Now, why didn't they have answers? Why didn't they have answers? Exactly what you're saying. They didn't have answers because all they did was parrot what they said. All they did was parrot what what the Gemara said. That's all they did. Yeah. In other words, they just said over the words, but they had no idea. They had no idea what it meant. Yeah. So, so a person can know it by heart. Very good. Yeah. But if you don't know what it means, if you don't know what it means, then, kind of like anyone ever watched the Frisco Kid, right? G. Wilder and Harrison Ford. So like the Indian chief takes the Sefer Torah and he's like, I read their holy Torah. So I didn't understand a word. Didn't understand a word. Very good. Yeah, that's like a lot of people. They take things out of context. They have no idea. They have no idea what it says. They probably don't care what it says, but they want to make us look bad, so they'll cherry pick and take plenty of things out, out of context. They can know a bit, they can know a lot. They could quote passages in Tanakh, in Torah, they could quote things verbatim. Yeah, so what? They could quote it, not know anything, right? Someone told me, I know the Bible backwards and forwards. You get this class every week on quote unquote the Torah portion of the week. I started from Genesis. I'm still holding by, Leviticus chapter 18, verse 3. There'll be a part 2, a part 3, and whatever on this verse as we go through. But I've been doing this for probably about 15 years more. I haven't covered that much ground. I know the Bible, backwards and forwards. Why would I need, to listen to this? So I said, wow, did you ever read the story of Lot and his daughters, right? One of the daughters, has, both have boys. One of them, she calls Moab, right? Not so, not so modest. And who comes out of Moab? Who comes out of Moab is Ruth, right? Who comes out of, everyone agrees, pretty clear, right? From the book of Ruth, who comes out of Ruth 3 generations later, 4 generations later, who comes out of Ruth, King David. So I bet you never thought the Messiah was going to come through an incestuous relationship. So I said, well, did you ever read the story of Tamar and Yehuda? Right? And she dressed up as a prostitute. He won't give his son to her or whatever. He gets together with her. She gets pregnant, wants to have her killed. And she says, whoever gave me these things is the one who impregnated me and whatever. And she has twins. And the whole question if Yehuda actually stayed with her or he didn't stay with her. But kingship never leads to the tribe of Yehuda, right? That's what Yaakov says when he's giving the blessings in the book of Genesis. So I said, I bet you never thought that's where kingship is going to come from. So they said, well, okay, Rabbi, what's your point? I said, my point is, you may know the Bible from cover to cover verbatim, but if you don't know, what's behind the stories and what's going on, then you don't really know it so well. Right? I said, that's the point. So people can repeat things, people can be parrots and whatever, and they can, like the Christians do, and they can turn the Torah into a pretzel and give Webster's 8th definition and, all kinds of things that make absolutely no sense. They have to be like, have to be stoned or drunk or whatever, come up with some of the explanations. They actually, come up with like, no, it's a hint. I had someone whatever a while ago. I was like, why is it? I got this, this Christian dogging me for a while. So I asked him, I said, why is it you don't have any direct quotes from our Torah that reference JC? Yeah, not one quote, not one direct quote. Everything is a hint. Everything is but it means like this and it's hint like that, but it never says directly. I said, I said, not the prophets doesn't say directly, right? See, but this is what it means. That's not what I asked. I said, show me a verse anywhere in the Torah, the writings, the prophets, that show what he said. Not a hint. Show me what he said. And he said, I don't have an answer. Well, you should get me an answer. That's kind of strange. You have to come through parables. You have to come through metaphors. You have to go to, Webster's 8th definition. Why not tell me something direct? Yeah. So, yeah, there are things that, people cherry pick, people say. I'm not saying some of them are not good questions. Some of them are good questions. Yeah. But still, why do you have to tell me this is what a reference to this and reference to that when, I have internal logic telling me not that way? Yeah. So, people say things, they can say, oh, and they can know Tanakh much better than me. Yeah. Much better than me. I'll quote verses here and verses there. Okay. Right. Some things I know, some things I don't know, but it'll take me 2 minutes to look up the quote and I'll see what it's talking about. They'll tell me it's talking about this. Very good. Let's see. Let's see what it's talking about. Let's see what the reference is. Let's see what the whole chapter is talking about. Let's see what we're talking about before. Yeah. Don't cherry pick. Let's see. Oh, I don't hold according to the rabbis. All right. Yeah, but you do. Because you have to hold by the Masoretic text. Masoretic text means they put vowels. They put vowels in the words. If you open up a Torah scroll, it doesn't have vowels. So how are you going to be able to read it, even according to King James Version or other versions? You can't. So I said, just tell me, you pick and choose what the rabbis say. So then finally, I hammered this person, and they got back to me and says, okay, I dislike a lot of what the rabbis say. Yeah. Because you can't say everything because there's one thing you can't say against. Someone asked on Perky Avos, ethics, my fathers, yeah. Isn't ethics the core of doing tshuva? Yeah. 100%. A person has to know who they are as well. They have to know strong points. They have to know they have to know where their weak points are. They have to know, what they need to work on. 100%. But what's the point of ethics? To know what I should do. To know how I should act. Right? If I don't act in the right way, what does it lead me to? Right? To do something wrong. Right? Now I can fix that. I can repent. Right? I can do tshuva. Right? That, that is true. So, as we said, a person can't teach ethics and be unethical. Right? Ethics are the base of what we do. Right? Essentially. I mean, you need fear, right? We always say you need fear of God. That's true. I have to love God. Love of God will lead to fear. Fear won't necessarily lead to love, but nonetheless, we have a conscience. We have things that are permissible, things that are forbidden. If I have things that are, that are forbidden, and God forbid a person does it, good. I can repent. But what does that tell about a person? You'll say, I have an evil inclination. Okay. Well, what does that tell more? It means I got to work very hard. I have to work very hard to stay in the right place and go in the right direction, no matter what life throws at me. Right? Now, a person can get desperate, do desperate things because they're on, they're going through a very hard time, let's say. So, you're saying, well, they're under onus. Well, not under onus. Onus means it's beyond their capability. It's not beyond their capability. Yeah, they just feel they're stuck, so they have to do certain things. And if they weren't stuck like that, they wouldn't do it. Okay. Yeah, but you're right. Ethics is the base. Ethics is a very, very strong base. Somebody asked, what if you're able at least to be grateful to Hashem for giving you the ability to enjoy physical aspects of the edition? If you know it's bad and you know it's going to kill you, thanking God for giving it to you, I don't know if that's such a big praise, because you're going to say, well, I'm so happy you gave me this, even though it's going to kill me. I mean, if I were playing God, I put on my funny George Burns glasses and my funny mustache, and I would say, but I didn't tell you to do this. This is going to take years away from your life. This is gonna take you away from, even coming close to reaching your potential, to reaching what you should do in this world. Right? So how's that a praise? You say, well, at least I enjoyed it. I mean, I can think of a lot of things I'm not gonna mention in public, but I can think of a lot of things that, yeah, this is such an enjoyment, right? This is such this is such an enjoyment, right? Even though it's going to destroy me. Now, does God want a person to be destroyed? No. Absolutely not. He wants you to enjoy this world, right? That's what the Torah says. He wants you to enjoy this world, as the Ramchal says in Path of the Just, right? At the very beginning, there's a way to enjoy this world, right? It's called Torah. It's called mitzvahs. Yeah. Now, there are things that are going to take me away from that. Addiction will take me away from that. Now, again, it depends what level, what it does, and all that, right? Whatever it is, doesn't matter, right? You know, giving thanks and praising God for something that's ultimately going to destroy me or potentially destroy me. I can't imagine God's going to look down too favorably and say, wow, that's beautiful. This is the greatest, one of the greatest things, about mankind. They can create things. I allow them to create things that can be utterly destructive, and they thank me for it. Yeah. They thank me for creating these terrible things that destroy their minds and destroy their bodies. They thank me. Now, is that going to get them anywhere? I tend to doubt it. I can't imagine that's such a praise. That'd be like saying, let's say it's addiction to drugs, right? Let's say it's hard drugs, yeah? Person addicted to hard drugs, God forbid. Is that going to destroy their life? Yes. 100%, unless they get serious help, that will destroy their life. Destroy their family, destroy their life, 100%, right? So before a person decides, whatever drug they're taking, they want to thank God for giving you this great drug. Yeah. But destroys them. It absolutely 100% destroys them. Could kill them. Literally could kill them. But even if it doesn't, going to destroy brain cells, destroy any type of relationship they're going to have with other people. I mean, I can think of 100 things that are going to be bad. So now, a person's going to say, well, it's still so enjoyable. Thank you for giving me this. I can't imagine God's going to be too happy with that. Now, you can tell me it depends what it is. Let's say it's food. Can a person, you make a blessing, or if not, you don't have to make a blessing. But can you say, I enjoy this food even though it's high in cholesterol and it's high in fats and it's probably going to kill me anyway? Yeah, it could give me a heart attack. Okay. That I could hear. That I could hear you praising him because it's giving you something that's maybe it's not beneficial to you, but you enjoy it. Okay. There could be negative effects, not directly. But if it's a direct negative effect, praising God for it, I would think that's problematic. I would definitely think that's problematic. God's not going to see that as a praise, right? I could imagine, I'll just play this out. I could imagine, if a person would say that, let's say someone would say it. I can imagine in heaven, the angels are like, they turn to God and say, see, look what you created over here. You created mankind as, living in this cream puff generation, as I would call it. You look thousands of years later. You created mankind. They're praising you for the garbage that you allowed them to create. Now, the angels have a claim. They absolutely have a claim. Now, God's going to say, it doesn't matter. I created man. I gave him free choice. Okay, right? He can say, look, my creation's, they're praising me. Okay, not necessarily the right way, but they're praising me for the things that destroy them. Doesn't make any sense. Would not make any sense. Yeah, and the reason is because it's destroying them. It would be something good, and it's helping them, and they're getting closer to God. Now, there are people today, even maybe some in the Orthodox community, I've heard stories about this, taking some hallucinogenic, drugs in order to be closer to God. This is a serious problem. This is a very serious problem. You don't need hallucinogenic drugs, draw close to God. Yeah. Now, how's God going to view that? These are supposedly Orthodox Jews. Yeah. So they're using psychedelic drugs to draw close to him, to have this type of experience. That's what you need to draw close to God? I can't imagine. I can't imagine, I can't imagine. It's not good for you. Certainly not good for you. Yeah. I'm not saying they're totally abusing it. Say they do it once in a while. Let's say they do it once in a while. No big deal. Once in a while, but they want to have this experience. Is that a real experience? Right? Break it down. Is that a real experience? No. It's not a real experience. You're under the influence. But that's the only way you can get to this experience. I don't know. I'm more Lithuanian in that sense, but you can be more Hasidic and sing and dance. I don't need that. I definitely don't need that. But I can't imagine such a case. God's ecstatic with it. Yeah. And let's say somebody says, "Oh, it's such an unbelievable experience. I feel so close, this and that." And they're fooling themselves, right? They're fooling themselves. So someone there points out, very good, just about to get there. So you can read my mind, ESP. Yeah, sounds like an excuse to do drugs. Yep. They're saying, but that's what it does. I don't know. I'm not convinced. I'm definitely not convinced. You know, maybe they feel something. I don't know what they feel, right? It's not something real. It's definitely not something real. But they're going to use it in that sense to say, look, it draws me close to God. Look what it does. Look at the experience. Yeah, they're going to have other problems. It's going to lead to other problems, right? For sure. But, it's not the first time. Not the first time I've heard it. I've heard it from, a few different sources. And that's a scary thing, right? It is a scary thing, but I would agree. I would agree. It's, is it permissible to use any type of drugs for that? No. Now people use this. I'm going to end with this. People say that one of the ingredients, in the Ketores, I think it was in the Ketores, in the incense that they use, one of the ingredients they say was cannabis. Right? See, many people make the claim. Many people make the claim. Can't imagine for 1 second, the holiness of these people. That's what they're using as part of the Ketores. Yeah. And the waving it in praise of God. It makes no sense. Makes absolutely no sense. Or people say it's a mistranslation, other things I want to, get into it. But that's a claim. They say, well, if they could do it back then and they were very, quote unquote, very close to God and great generation, this and that, why can't we do it? Why can't we have that same experience? They had it. Again, many people swear by it. Will absolutely swear that's the case. It's it's what we call a tatra disastri. Two things contradict each other. Total contradiction, right? One thing you're using something that's gonna put a person in like a certain state of mind, and that's gonna draw them closer to God. I can't imagine for one split second God's gonna say, "Yeah, that's what I created the world for. That's what I created incense for, so you guys can have like a nice smell while performing my service." Really? I mean, logically, people say, doesn't matter about logic. That's what they did. That's what they had. You say like, all these people like were when they're spraying the incense, they're all high from it. Hard to imagine. Some people swear by it. You go online, you Google it, it's there. Plenty of people gonna make the claim, not religious Jews gonna make the claim. Yeah, but they're gonna make the claim. Right? And again, it could be the same thing. Could be the exact same thing. The exact same thing that they're gonna make the claim in order to permit that they're allowed to do it. Someone there says Cohen says it makes him understand his role to be a Cohen better. Cohen, if you live outside of Israel, even if you don't, there's not that much that Cohen does, except he blesses the congregation on on the high holy days or on a festival. Here, Cohen blesses the congregation, every day. Okay, and more than that, gets called up first to the Torah, and like very few things. Okay, can't go to cemetery, some other things. Yeah, there are very few things that they can do today, even if they live in the land of Israel. Now, if that's true, and not really doing that much anyway, how does this help? They're not doing very much. If you tell me they're serving in the temple and they're busy doing all kinds of things like they used to do, and the base on Mikdash, very good. Yeah, then we can have somewhat of a discussion. They don't do anything today. I mean, you have to have respect for them. If you can let them eat benching, grace after meals, they get called to the Torah for it. Okay, but many other things don't apply. I mean, they bless the congregation every day here, in Israel, outside of Israel, only during the high holy days and during what do you call it? And during festivals. They don't do anything else. They don't do anything else significantly that has anything to do with being a Kohen like back in the day. Not even close. Not even close. Yeah, so they don't really do that much. How does that help them? That's a crock. That's an absolute crock because they don't do that much. They absolutely don't do that much. So if they don't do that much, how's that help them? You want to tell me it helps them serve God in general? Like some people make the claim, maybe, I tend to doubt it, right? But if they don't really do that much anyway, how are they fulfilling what they're doing as a Kohen better? As if to say they're doing all these things that a Kohen used to do back in the day, right? Kappa would say, survey says, not true. What are they doing today? Nothing. Very little. Very little. So that's, as someone here pointed out, very true. That's saying, that's giving them permissibility to say it's okay to do it. That's what it says. Yeah. Someone asked, doesn't the idea of drugs bad go back to Nadav and Avihu? It's a question of what Nadav and Avihu did. They brought incense. Doesn't mean it was drugs, but they brought incense into the Holy of Holies when they weren't supposed to. They thought it was an auspicious time. They thought it was a very auspicious time, putting up the tabernacle, putting up the Mishkan, and God took their lives. But there are all different reasons the Gemara gives. That's a simple reason. Or you tell me they drank. They drank while performing the service. That they shouldn't have done. That 100% they shouldn't have done. Right? The question is exactly what was forbidden. But even if you tell me it was the incense, they brought a strange fire. Who said it was drugs? Who in the world says it was drugs? Okay, they brought incense. Doesn't mean it was drugs. That one doesn't mean it was drugs. You think they would have had. I mean, you're talking about very holy people. It's very hard to understand. But you want to say that they were going to go into the Holy of Holies when you're only allowed to go on in Yom Kippur? Go in Yom Kippur, they were bringing drugs into the Holy of Holies. It's very hard to say. Very, very hard to say. Yeah, a number of potential reasons why, why they died. But the Torah makes very clear, right? It makes very clear. Either it was because they drank wine, or seemingly because they brought the strange fire. Seemingly, it's because they brought the strange fire. That's what it sounds like. But even the strange fire, right? Who says it was drugs? Right? Who says it was drugs? Florida says they drank, so it doesn't connect. They get plastered. You think they got plastered? I can't imagine they got plastered. Right? They drink. You're not allowed, persons, not allowed to serve if they drink. Now the question is how much they drink. If you can't speak in front of the king, then you can't make a blessing. Right? Right? The only time you hear anything, someone drank, really so much is on Purim. And that, the mitzvah to drink a lot, right? Or drink more than you normally drink, right? But who says they got plastered? Who says they got plastered? Yeah, maybe, first of all, wine might have been much stronger than also, so they didn't have to drink a lot, right? Doesn't necessarily mean, doesn't necessarily mean they were plastered per se. But yeah, once it says, once they got killed, then the Torah says, I'll drink wine. Yeah, and the question is how much? How much did they drink? Right? Were they intoxicated? Maybe they were intoxicated. Doesn't mean they were plastered. Right? They could have been, I don't know, a little bit tipsy. I don't know. They drank enough where, maybe they weren't thinking 100% straight. Doesn't mean they were plastered. Doesn't necessarily mean they were plastered, but yeah, it could be. It could be they drank and affected them. And, so drinking is part of the service you can't do. Even if it's not that much. Even if it's not that much, you wouldn't be allowed to. All right, I'm going to stop here. We'll continue with this next week. Anyone has any questions, find me on Facebook at Michael Chaim Kaufman, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism, orthodoxconversion.com, Beyond Orthodox Conversion Judaism on YouTube. I got videos, Q&As, Ethics for Fathers, Book of Leviticus. You want to send me an email, rabbichaimkaufman@gmail.com, RBBICHAIMCOFMAN @gmail.com, which have a good beginning of the day, middle of the day, end of the day.